This episode of ChatGPD was made possible by the hard work and creativity of our production team. A huge thank you to Emily Young, Chris Sang, and Alakia Chandran for their expert production, editing, and behind the scenes magic that brings each conversation to life. We also want to thank Sarah Topa and the IMS for their support in helping us share ideas, stories, and resources that empower our grad students at every stage of their journey.
So welcome back to another episode of ChatGPD, our podcast on careers in biomedical sciences. I'm Pamela Plant, and today's guest is Kelsey McLaughlin. Kelsey is an assistant professor at the University of Toronto and an early career researcher and a translational research scientist at Sinai Health. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you so much.
So I would like you to begin by not talking about what you do, because I'm sure a lot of our viewers are graduate students in biomedical sciences, and they will understand assistant professor, they will understand translational researcher. What we would like to know is, what is your journey? And when did you know you wanted to be a researcher? And what were some of the steps that you thought were critical taking you to where you are now?
So I never thought I was going to be an assistant professor. I never really set out thinking that I was going to end up in academia, but I always wanted to be in science. So when I was younger, my mom was a science teacher. So we were dissecting pigs and frogs and all these other animals at probably too young of an age. And then I went to Queen's for my undergraduate. I did life sciences there. And a really pivotal point for me was when I was probably my third or fourth year, I heard a speaker, Dr. Barker, who had developed the Barker hypothesis, which was really this, seminal researcher, and he really linked the in utero exposure or the in utero journey to chronic health later in life, and it was totally serendipitous, like a complete chance encounter that I saw this lecture, and from that point onwards, I was really, really kept coming back to pregnancy and maternal health. And so I sought out to do my fourth year research project in an animal model in pregnancy. I worked in a government lab one summer. I worked in clinical research at the Ottawa Hospital. And then when I finished my undergrad, I really just thought, of course I'm going to do a master's. Of course I'm going to continue on. I didn't feel like I was done yet. And so I came to the University of Toronto and I ended up doing clinical research and really just becoming very, very interested in the working with patients. So very sort of on the ground in the clinical setting type of research. And so again, but this whole time I was in this journey, I then transitioned from a master's to the PhD program. I just never thought that I was going to go into academia. But I think for me, when I kept just looking at what was in front of me at that time and sort of saying, okay, well, here's an opportunity. And then this led to another opportunity. And then all of a sudden I was applying for academic jobs. And so at the beginning, it felt a little bit funny because I thought, I have some friends who have really just optimized their path from the very beginning. They were super strategic. They knew exactly, what degrees they needed to do and what accreditation and how many courses they needed to teach. And so I was really surprised to find myself applying for academic jobs. And I think it does show the value of people maybe coming from different paths and sort of coming from different experiences and us valuing different types of experience and what is our definition of research? Because I really didn't think I was going to end up in academia.
And maybe that's why you did. I think, I work with so many grad students that are going through that discernment process. And there's almost just an exclusionary, I'm not going into academics. Right. And I always wonder why. Why, let's scratch below the surface. Is it because you've had a bad example with your principal investigator, or why is it that people exclude that as an option? Is it funding? Is it job prospects? I think maybe I'd like you to shed light on that, because I want to offer hope to students that do want academic positions. And could you speak to that and some of the critical steps that you think got you to where you are?
I find that a lot of people that I knew who were in the job that I would end up, having, so not clinicians, but, PhD scientists, I found a lot of people spoke really negatively about it. I found there was a lot of negative discussion over, looking for grants, looking for funding, and it is very difficult. It certainly is a challenge that comes with the job. But I didn't find a lot of people were speaking so openly about all the amazing positive parts of the job. So, getting to pursue these research questions and work with amazing people and have some flexibility over your time and your schedule. And so I, in hindsight, found that there was just a lot of negative discussion and a lot of, it was just, I didn't find that the overall perception of the job was necessarily always a positive one. So I think for me, that was something. Another thing was, I think as we were just talking about, I thought that you had to do everything exactly in the right order and the right way with the right people. So for example, I didn't want to do an international postdoc. It just didn't fit my life. It didn't fit what I was looking for. And I remember a number of people said to me, well, if you don't do an international postdoc, you're not going to get an academic position. And so I think at that point, I just thought like, well, then I'm not going to get an academic position. And so I think that feeling as though the process was so rigid and I didn't feel like that rigid process fit me or what my interests were or, my personal life, that didn't really fit for me. So I thought, I guess I'm excluded from the process then. And so what really was pivotal for me to actually be included in this field and sort of feel like I was a competitive applicant was my mentors. So people coming to me and saying like, well, you're doing such amazing work, or, we think you would be really impactful here, or you would be a great fit for this institution. So I think that speaks to the importance of mentors, because I also don't come from a family who has experience being in academia. So I don't think that I was fully aware of what it meant, what the job meant, what the application process would look like. So I think by expanding my network a little bit to speak with different mentors, but also some of my colleagues who maybe were a couple of years ahead of me and had been applying to jobs, what were the interviews like? And so I think that having a really helpful group of friends and colleagues who would share so freely, they would share application documents, they would share questions of the interviews. I think when I started to sort of have more exposure to that, I thought, I can do this. Like, of course I can do this. But I think that it took getting some of that external feedback for me, because I felt like it wasn't for me. And then hearing some of that feedback, it really helped me to reposition and think like, oh, I actually think I could do this.
I love that. And I love that you really focused on what the benefits of what you loved about the job, as opposed to the fear of, not pursuing, because there is always a fear of funding and lack of funding. But I think one thing stuck out to me in that's a trope that I heard as well all the time. I need to go over to Europe or to the US.
Right.
I need to adopt some technique or some methodology or some organ or model organism or system that I could bring back to Toronto. So you're bringing that value back to the ecosystem of Toronto research. So how did you bring that without going external? You obviously were kept because you were bringing something novel and new, and you were facilitating the obstetrics and gynecology department that you were part of at University of Toronto. How did you create that niche by not leaving Toronto?
I think what I brought, instead of bringing back like a certain technique or certain model, was bringing ideas. And so I think that, I'd done a little bit of work in cardiology, and then I was in obstetrics. I'd done some animal work. I tried a couple of different things. And I think that sort of by bringing that together and coming forward with novel ideas and actually creating and putting together novel collaborations between different clinical departments and different research departments, I think that what helped me was, and I was at the center of this. And so I think that I can definitely see some situations where you do need to go learn from someone a certain technique, a certain skill. But I think for me, it was really more about developing networks of people. And I think that when my position then, when I became an assistant professor, now I'm really sitting at the center of that. And I think that in whether it's animal work, whether it's clinical work, you want to almost be the go-to person, right? So whether it's an animal model, it's a certain technique. And I think that for me, I'm making an effort to become the go-to person in this one specific area and bringing people together, bringing ideas together, developing different networks across Canada. And I think that is in place of, again, sort of doing this international type of training.
And I think that might be another misperception that you brought up, is that you do need an MD and a PhD to get an academic position in Toronto at the teaching hospitals now, but you have again proven that this is not true either. And can you speak to your unit? Is it largely MDs? Are you bringing that value proposition that you are kind of a basic scientist, as it were? that you might have different training from your colleagues, and that's something that you are the go-to person on, or can you speak to that?
Sure. So my environment is really exciting. So I work at Mount Sinai Hospital, and I work within the high risk obstetrics clinical team. So most of my colleagues at this point are high risk obstetricians, so they're all MDs. Some of them have additional training, for example, like a master's in epidemiology, but they're all medical doctors. And so what's really interesting is that they're all people who are just excited and very, very, very smart people, but a lot of them don't actually have the time to dedicate to research, or enough time to dedicate to research. And so I think that for me being in this position, I can really add to, and together we're very synergistic in sort of bringing on a PhD trained research scientist. And so even though I'm doing clinical research now, all of my previous training, so again, molecular work, animal work, physiology work, it all lends itself to the clinical work because, if we're having discussions over, so my PhD was in pharmacology, if we're discussing mechanisms of drugs, I can speak to it of, well, there was this animal model, or there was this tissue culture that showed this. And so I think that it's been a really, really exciting new type of position. I was the position in this department didn't exist before I was hired, so it is a new position, which is really exciting. But I think that being able to dedicate full time to research. So I'm not running to clinic or running to labor and delivery or running to the ward. I can really sit down and have focused time to write the grants, to sit with students, to go, review manuscripts with students. And so I think that it's been a really, really exciting and really amazing opportunity. But it's a very clinical environment, but really testing out this model of bringing back a scientist, a PhD trained scientist, into the clinical environment.
Yeah, I think that's a very unique position and probably not that common. Would you say that's becoming increasingly more common?
So I think that it used to be more common a number of years ago. It seems to have gotten a little bit phased out, but there is a resurgence. So one of my good friends just got hired at St. Paul's in Vancouver, and he's the same as me, PhD trained. He's actually through IMS, and he went out to Vancouver now. So I think it is becoming more of interest to clinical departments, especially clinical departments that really want to be on the forefront of research, and they want to, especially if you're doing clinical trials or you're doing this mechanistic work, I think that there is a lot of interest now in bringing back the PhD trained scientists.
Yeah, I think it would bring a certain depth that it's very hard for the clinician scientists to bring, just because time. Time, energy, effort, clinical, juggling clinical responsibilities and research. It's,
Right.
I've seen so many clinician scientists colleagues that are doing it, and I really don't know how they do it.
I don't know how they do it, no. But I think what's nice about it as well is that my research benefits so much from it because, to sit with the patients in the clinic, we can ask patients like, if we develop this new approach to preeclampsia prevention, is this something you might be interested in? And so I think for us, we're very grateful to have our research informed with patient partners, even from from conception at the very beginning, and then even all the way through into how do we disseminate this information? What are the implementation steps? What are the next steps? So for us, we feel like we're so closely informed by the patients so that all the research that we're doing is hopefully as valuable as possible at the end.
Well, and isn't that what translational research is
Exactly.
truly all about?
Exactly.
Is having that patient involvement through the whole trajectory of the research fair. Would you say that there is anything that you wish you knew about your academic position while you were applying, or that's something that you really shocked you?
Yeah, I think when I first started, that I hadn't anticipated is I felt a little bit alone on my first few weeks. I sort of was at work, and I think that one downside of training is that because it is so long, you become so used to having someone helping you, right? Or someone supervising you, and it's really, really, really important. But I think for me, it was so funny to me that all of a sudden one day I was independent. And so I did go through a phase where I just felt a little bit uncertain and a little bit alone because I was now in charge of building a team. I wasn't part of a team, I was building a team. And so I don't think that I anticipated that. And I think that it really took me learning that I had to reach out to people and ask for advice and ask for feedback to seek those mentors out, because the mentors aren't built in for you like they are when you're in your training, because that's so valuable. And so what was the other point I was going to make? the other part that I was going to say is how much of the job actually is not science. And so I think that when you're in training, you're working on your research project, you're so dedicated towards it. And you see your supervisors, doing things behind the scenes, but you might not fully understand what their days look like. I did not fully understand what their days looked like. So I think the amount of time that you're actually, all of a sudden, you are now working as your own finance department, your own HR department, you're working, like, I think that was surprising to me. Like, of course, the science is still the number one, the most important, but how many others you're managing people, I think that I was a little bit caught off guard with how much of this role and how much of my time is spent doing non-science tasks.
Right. I mean, and then conflict resolution,
Right.
that's a big one.
Right.
And
Or even how to hire people.
you have to build a team.
You have to build a team.
You have to build a
Yeah.
team. So can we talk about that? How do you build a team? How do you build a culture? When you are just starting out fresh? Are you drawing on experiences or models that you saw in grad school that you would like to recapitulate? Or are you kind of organically just rolling with it and seeing what feels right to you? What is your process for that?
I think that you certainly draw on maybe whether it was from yourself or from some of your peers of like what you saw that worked and didn't work. I think that certainly forms your foundation. But then some of it is a little bit of rolling with it because you don't know who's going to apply to be part of your program. You don't know what their interests are. And so I think that you actually have to be able to pivot quite quickly. I think that it's been trial and error for me in terms of what skills am I looking for of someone to hire. So whether it's an undergrad research student or a master's student or a summer student or other colleagues or maybe someone that I might be collaborating with, I think that you just have to learn, because again, all of a sudden you're making decisions for yourself and your own team, is you getting to decide who to work with and really having to think about what skills matter the most, what skills can I teach someone, what skills actually can't be taught, so I do need them to come in with it. But even the hiring process, like what do you ask for? What questions do you ask people? How many interviews? Because for some of these positions, you're investing, especially like a grad student, you're investing quite a bit of money into them. And you also want to make sure that they have the best experience possible. And so I think that that was also something that kind of caught me off guard a little bit, is like, even just for me, and I'm still developing my approach to building my team and to hiring. So I think that I'm still going through the motions of learning, like, what is the best way forward? And a point that one of my colleagues at Carleton brought up is also, how do we do this in an equitable way? Because we all have our own unconscious biases. So how do we approach the hiring process and building our team in a way that, we really try to eliminate as much bias as we can?
That's a very good point. And I love the kind of the picture I get is like being a principal investigator is on the job training. Like you're learning and growing as you go along in your role. How long have you been in your role currently?
I've been in my role for 2 years and maybe 2.5 years now.
Yeah. 2.5.
So
and
still
do you
early
feel
career.
like you're getting the ropes now, or are you still reiterating and learning as you go along? I guess that's a lifelong thing.
Right. I was going to say.
When do you kind of feel like you've hit your stride and you've got this?
Right.
It's old hat to you.
I mean, I think I'm hitting the point now of just sort of taking a breath, of just saying, okay, we've got some funding in place. We have some exciting projects that we're working on. We have some exciting collaborators, just slowly and very consciously building the team over time. And so I think that for me, the point now where I'm sort of taking a breath is that I have really amazing trainees that actually have their own independent research projects that they feel a lot of empowerment over. And so I think that the fact that now they're running their own research projects as part of this greater team, we're also, everyone's kind of fitting together, and there's enough in place now that I can turn my attention to, writing grants, presentations, if I have to go for a conference, and feeling actually quite confident that, they've got this, and trusting them, and just feeling like things are a little bit more under control. But I would say that in the last maybe 2 or 3 months was the first time I could sort of take a breath. And I think that I had a long time this feeling of, what else should I be doing? And not being 100% certain that I was doing everything that I needed to be doing. So I think it took me a couple of years to just get used to the role, get used to the responsibilities, get used to some of the requests of sort of different leadership as well from, the university side or the hospital side. And now I just feel like I have a little bit of a better grasp of like what my expectations are, because I wasn't quite sure coming into it what the expectations were. So I feel like just recently, I feel like I'm understanding them much better. I'm feeling much more confident and a little bit more relaxed. But yeah, I'm not sure if the learning ever stops. We're starting to get a clinical trial.
Because the new responsibilities are going to be laid on the table for you, and
Right.
you're going to have to, pivot and respond to those.
Sure,
And
yeah.
I'm sure it's just going to be constant learning process.
Yeah, I would say though that one skill that I learned in grad school that for myself was the most important skill was a confidence that I can figure it out. And so, you're running your experiment for your 30th day in a row and something's not working, just having that perseverance of, okay, I'm going to figure this out. I can figure it out. I can figure it out. And so I think that for me, that has really been a translatable skill to my current job.
And I'd like to talk about transferable skills later, because I think it's so critical for our listeners to understand what they're developing now in grad school and during their postdocs are core competencies that are absolutely transferable. I'm just wanting to go back and ask you for advice that you could give grad students and postdocs that are in the discernment process and having that self-doubt of, can I do this? Can I not do this? What advice would you give them for career discernment? Whether, what is the process that they can go through, questions they can ask themselves about whether pursuing academic career is right for them during this period where they're just like, really a lot of self-doubt is what I see with a lot of students. And you're right that there are some that absolutely are driven to an academic career from the get-go.
Right.
And, we're not addressing those students right now. They've got it all figured out.
Yeah.
So what about the ones that are, really uncertain? What advice would you give them?
So the first piece of advice I would give is that if you're, completing a PhD or you're completing a postdoc, you are in a way a PI, like especially for postdocs. Like, so for some people saying like, I'm not sure if I can do it. If you are completing a postdoc and you're feeling confident and you're really enjoying it, it's like training wheels PI, right? So of course there are more responsibilities, but it's just that step forward. And so I think that actually seeing that, when you're a postdoc, you are absolutely training for the PI role. And so one thing I would recommend for postdocs is, so I just mentioned to you that there are many other parts of the role that maybe we don't necessarily think about when we're in training, is to actually seek that out, is to ask if you can get involved, even just to sit in meetings or be an active participant in managing finances, looking at grant budgets and their breakdowns and how that money is going to be allocated. Even, for example, in maybe for some of the more junior trainees in the hiring process. So I think that actually just adding on those little pieces could make a big difference, because again, if you're enjoying your postdoc and you're doing well, then you can do the science as a PI. That's fine. You've shown that you can do that. I think it's just maybe testing out the waters for those other areas to just build confidence even further, to really feel like you're prepared and that this is a job that you might enjoy. In terms of some of the a piece of advice I would give is, I think that sometimes people tend to say academia is so hard. It's, again, we just spoke about this in a bit of a negative context. And it was interesting because when I actually did apply to other jobs as I was applying to academic jobs, and speaking to quite a few of my friends about this. What does your job look like? What does your day look like? And I think that sometimes because we get in this bubble, this, when you're training academia bubble, that a lot of your friends end up being in academia as well. But if you speak to other friends outside of academia, everyone's jobs has pros and cons. Everyone's jobs has pros and cons. So you hear a lot, grant writing is so difficult, funding is so difficult. Of course it is. It's a huge challenge in Canada for academia. But we have a lot of pros to the job. And so I think that just hearing what other people's pros and cons are to their job, I think it's about finding the pros and cons that you can live with, right? Or like finding something that the pros are so amazing that they do balance out the cons. But I think that I used to have this, that's almost had created this narrative of these other jobs are perfect and amazing and academia is too hard for me, or it's too difficult, it's too challenging, when it's just completely not true. It's really, really not true. So I think that reaching out to people who will speak honestly with you about what their days look like in completely different areas, I almost found that finding the job I wanted to do, it was easier to cross off jobs I didn't want to do, if that makes sense. So speaking to people in nonprofit, in industry, in different companies, I just was really finding myself not being excited by that work and really being excited by the science. And so I would just say that if you can speak to someone who's maybe a few years ahead of you, so again, someone who's early career, if you're in clinical research or if you're in, biodiscovery type of research, and asking them, what does your day look like? What does your week look like? Because I think that is easier to think about on like a day-to-day basis than to think, well, 5 years from now, I'm going to have to go up for promotion. That's okay. That's 5 years from now, right?
Yeah.
So I think breaking it down into like, what do you spend? You wake up, you go to work, what do you do? I think that for me is much easier to absorb than thinking about it as an abstract concept of a career.
Okay, so Kelsey, what does your week look like?
So my week is very variable.
Maybe week and / month.
Sure. So we just got out of grant writing month.
Yeah.
And so I'll give you an example of that month and maybe not a grant writing month. So we were submitting a clinical trial. We got some bridge funding for it. And so quite a bit of time is that like grant writing, working with the team. And I actually view grant writing as creative time. I view any type of writing as a creative time. And I think that academia, at least the work that we do, it's actually a creative job. And I don't think that we think about it enough like that.
I agree.
And so it was very much dedicated to grant writing. Now we're sort of out of grant writing month. So my week right now, what are we working on? So I have a number of trainees that I'm working with. So one trainee just started, so making sure that she has all of her proper training. We're getting her up and running. Her REB is submitted. We're working with this clinical trial team to get our REB completed, all of our documents, and this is sort of like a Canadian-wide initiative. We're writing papers. I'm going to a conference soon that I'm preparing for. So what I like about the job is how every day is different. And I also really enjoy having some autonomy over what I'm doing that day. So of course, like you have things, you have meetings, you have things that you sort of have to do, but then in those spare periods of time where you sort of look at your to-do list, I like that I can choose what I do that day. So if I'm like in a really creative mood and I have to finish a discussion, I'll probably finish it tomorrow, I need to do that when I'm in that certain mindset. Whereas there are other times where like, I have a couple of things I have to do with finance right now where it's a little bit more just like focus and do it. I might do that when I'm a little bit more tired. So I really enjoy having that flexibility to sort of wake up and think like, okay, here's what I have to do today, but then what do I want to do today? And so I think that being able to decide for myself and really trying to enjoy the work as much as possible, that is a part of the job that I enjoy quite a bit.
And it sounds like they're buckets. So you have your creative bucket that involves the grant writing and the dreaming of the experiments and problem solving. You have your operations bucket, your finance, your procurement, your REB applications, very perfunctory things. So that would, you balance those buckets as the PI. And that's maybe something you alluded to, that training in the operational side is something you really need to develop during your postdoc, because the creative scientific side,
you've been working on that for years. Yeah.
You're doing it.
Yeah.
So if you kind of tapped into resources with those operational things, it might actually give you the confidence that you can pull this off.
Absolutely.
As a career.
For sure.
Transferable skills. Like you mentioned, I can figure this out. Okay. So that problem solving, that critical thinking. What are some of the other like really standout transferable skills that you use on a daily basis?
Right. The number one most important by far, for either it's myself or a potential collaborator, is time management. You can have someone who is the most brilliant, amazing, creative person. If they don't answer their emails or meet deadlines that you might have, you can't work with them. And so I think that being able to manage your time and manage, you have different projects going on, plus you have family life, you have social life, you have all these different things. I think that being able to manage your time is the number one most important. And so if I'm interviewing potential trainees or, summer students, things like that, if we say, okay, we're going to meet at this date and this time, and that person is half an hour late, automatic no. Because it's the most important skill is time management skills. And I think that for us, for any type of science, but for sure for us with patients, we never ever want to be, because we need to instill confidence. We need to instill confidence in patients to participate in a research program and feel as though we are organized and that their time is valued. And so I think that if we don't have time management skills, the research wouldn't be possible. So I think that that is the number one. And I think that actually for people who come through for a PhD and a postdoc, most people become very, very good with managing their time
Yeah, you
properly.
feel like that's something they can develop as
Absolutely.
time goes on.
Yes,
Practice,
absolutely.
practice,
Yeah.
practice.
So
Yeah.
I would say that. I would say, so as I mentioned before, oh gosh, what did I mention before? So
Like I can figure this out.
I can figure this out. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can figure this out. I think for me as well, in my current position, the last and also very important skill is connecting with people. I think that the reality is like once you get to the phase of your career where you're independent, you get to choose who you work with. And that is also, I think, a really, really positive, exciting part of becoming an independent PI is having that selection to build not only your own team internally, but also your own collaborators, whether it's locally, nationally, internationally. And so I think that being able to connect with people and again, just showing them that you can be a reliable partner, that you're someone, a creative person. So I think being able to sort of connect with people and showing them a little bit of yourself, because sometimes you get such short periods of time to connect with people, especially in person. I think that's really important.
I know this is a bit of a loaded question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Yeah.
Is there a personality that thrives as an independent researcher? Like I know there are just so many different personalities of principal investigators that grad students are exposed to. But would you say that there is like a prototype that tends to thrive? And what would that prototype be?
I would say the common denominator is people who are really passionate and believe in what they're doing. I think that can exist within different personality types. You get people who are maybe a little bit more quiet, people who are more like introverted, extroverted. But I think that the common denominator is everyone just is so passionate and believes so strongly in what you're doing. Because again, if you get like your fourth or fifth or whatever it is grant in a row that you don't get funded for, you still need to believe so strongly in the work that you're doing to submit submit 2 more grants. And you need to be able to also inspire your team. And so I think that is the common personality trait that you see are people who are very, very passionate about the work that they're doing.
Yeah, and one thing that you said that really resonated with me is your decision to go into grad school and to continue on with your PhD. You said there was no question.
Right.
Like there really was no question. I felt the same way in grad school. I'm like, of course I'm going to go into research. I can't not answer these questions.
Right.
Like you just have that burning desire to just keep drilling down and answering questions, asking questions like that. You couldn't imagine a life.
No. And it was funny.
That.
And it was funny because again, I didn't think of myself as being academia bound, but I thought, okay, I just need to do this one more thing and then I'm going to get another job. Okay, I'm just going to do one postdoc and then I'm going to get a job. But like
you went to a talk and it's like, oh my God,
I know.
would love to do that.
Can you imagine doing that? I know. Yeah, exactly.
So what about some of the challenges you've faced as an early career researcher? Like what are some of the biggest challenges you've personally faced and how have you dealt with those?
Sure. So I think that one issue that many ECRs face is of course like the funding landscape. And I think that for me, because now I'm responsible for my team of people, is I really feel a responsibility only to bring on people if I can give them a really good experience. And so I need to make sure that I have enough funding for them, that they can complete everything they want and need to complete, that they can sort of have some runway to answer these questions, even if it means adding on another technique or a few more patients, that we do have the funding for them to have a really positive experience. And so I think that for me, that's actually come with quite a bit of anxiety of thinking, okay, well, if we put money towards this, are we going to have any money to put towards that? And so I think that for me, it's really been just learning how to, again, believe that I can figure it out. So I think, okay, I can handle this for 2 years and just think, you know what, in year 3, I'm going to figure it out. And I have a couple of years to figure this out. And so I think that the funding has been stressful, but the nice thing about being an ECR is that there's quite a few awards that are available to you that are specifically designated for ECRs. And they might be 25,000 or 20,000. But when you start to piece them together, you can build, you can sort of put a fund together for yourself that can go towards really, really productive items. So for example, bringing on a master's student. But I think that like many other ECRs, do feel a lot of anxiety about the funding situation in the long term.
Yeah. And I guess this would be where collaborations and networking really would help with that.
Absolutely.
You know, the more people you collaborate, the more funds you have available to you as team members of bigger grants, and maybe it might not be you as the sole author on the grant, but you know, it's money.
Right.
And it will pay for a quarter of a technician that will help drive other projects. So
absolutely,
you know, just to network and really get out there.
And I think the good problem to have is that we have more ideas than money. And so, you know, as the money comes, we always have really exciting research projects to put them towards. And so I think that I'd rather it be this way than be the other way around.
Absolutely. So we talked about balance. We talked about it in the context of a clinician scientist. I would imagine that balance is a really important thing for you to strike, even though you're not a clinician. How do you maintain a balance? Do you maintain a balance? What is that like? Is it, you know, you go through periods where you're completely imbalanced and then you kind of recalibrate, or what is your process like? And really, what are those habits that you've developed that really protect your personal life?
So I think that there's just this understanding that there are busier times of the year. And I think that's with any type of job. So again, I'll just make that stipulation. It's not just academia, it's any type of, like, you speak to someone who's an accountant or a teacher, there are just times of the year that are busier. So for us, of course, that's around grant season, especially with the larger CIHR project grants. So it tends to be in March and September. And so usually the month before that are busier times. So those are times, especially working with clinicians, where sometimes the time that we can meet is a Sunday afternoon. And so for me, that is just part of my job, and I do accept that. The other times of the year, it's, you know, if you're in a busy period, I think to myself, the other times of the year, I have a lot more flexibility. And so for me to sort of really buckle down, especially those 2 months, I'm completely fine with that because I know that I can balance it out the rest of the year. And so for me, I find that it's a job like many jobs where you don't leave at the end of the day and think, everything's done. I have, you know, my to-do list is short tomorrow. And so I think that for me, it's finding ways to enjoy, you know, my life outside of academia in a way where I'm not distracted, and I'm at least as you know, at the least amount I can be, and is just to make sure that I'm like fully present doing other activities I like to do. So for me, like, I really enjoy even during the day, sometimes, like if I'm really stuck on something and if I do have that time, just going for a half-hour walk. Like for me, I almost feel like that's part of that creative time, right? Is to go for the walk. I won't even listen to anything. I'll just sort of like look around, come back. And that makes me personally feel very, very refreshed. I know as well for me that like being as active as possible, whether it's, you know, playing tennis or Pilates, or that is something that works for me to really help me to clear my mind. I also bike to work. And so I find that biking time is like, not only do I not have to take the TTC, but it's actually very valuable for me to just like mentally and emotionally just like have a bit of a break between work and home. I also have to, again, like many people, many other jobs, sort of have like a stop time, because a lot of evenings you could sort of just go forever. And so I think that unless it's like a really hard deadline, is to just think like, okay, I'm done for the day. And many times I find that by having that deadline, it makes me more productive the next day because I'm not exhausted and you know, I have more brain space left over. So again, busier periods, of course, and that's just like any job where you have busy periods, but then really trying to stay as balanced as possible the rest of the year.
So you have your lab duties and the context of your appointment at Sinai. You're also appointed at the university, and you would have teaching duties, I would assume, or some kind of administrative committees, everything. And could you speak to kind of balancing those roles together?
Yeah, so I'm a lecturer, so I do lectures in a couple of different departments at the university, which I really enjoy. And I'm also on, like you said, a couple of different committees. So one is the promotions committee through at the university for the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. I'm also on the EDI committee for the university as well, and then some other committees through the hospital. And then I also do some work. I'm the co-chair of a national network that's around, you know, improving obstetric care for pregnant patients, and a few other different networks like that. And so I find that when I was first starting this role, my mentor said to me, say no to everything. Because he's like, you know, and when people ask you to do things, it's almost always from a very excited, positive place where they love you to be a part of it. But I think you do have to be cautious of like how much of yourself can you give. And of course, we want to participate and we want to give, but I would say that really trying to limit it to the causes that you feel that you can really contribute to the most, you're the most passionate about, is a better way to go. So I think it's better to contribute more to fewer, if you know what I mean, than to be really, really stretched across many, many different commitments. So I think that I did join too much when I first started, and now I've really narrowed down to some different committee and causes that I feel like I'm most passionate about and can contribute more of myself to.
Yeah, I feel like I'm always reminding myself quality over quantity.
Exactly.
You know, you want to really bring meaningful engagement to whatever you do. And when you're spread so thin, then the meaning and the quality of your participation really
Right.
starts to dwindle. So
And it comes back to what I said before, where I do think that at its core, being a PI is a creative job. And I think that really like protecting your creative space and not like, you know, you might have another couple of hours to give to someone else, but it doesn't mean that you should. And so again, I think that protecting that creative space and time is really important as a PI.
I love that you bring that up. Like I've always said, science is such a creative, artistic in many ways, artistic occupation. And it's so nice to hear somebody else with that perspective. Because there is so much creativity in it. We're wrapping up our time, and a fun thing that we always do at the end of each podcast, if you haven't seen any, is we ask our guest speaker to do a 1-minute pitch of their career choice and why students should consider being a principal investigator, an associate professor at an academic institution, and a researcher. So if I could just grab my phone and you can get 5 seconds
to come up with my pitch.
Come up with your on-the-spot pitch.
Sure.
This is part of the fun, right? So whenever you are ready.
Okay. So my research focuses on improving the health of pregnant people in Canada. And I think what is so exciting about it is there's a lot of research that there's a lot of mechanistic research now and, different types of drug research, but it hasn't translated into clinical care. And so I think what's really exciting about the work that I do and some of my colleagues do is to actually make that change to patient care. So the translational research type of work. And I think that, the work is so exciting. You're seeing the change, you're working with patients, you're seeing it bettering the lives of the patients and their babies and their families. And I think that for us, we have a responsibility because there are so few people who are able to sort of have this job and have this impact, that we have such a large responsibility to do this work and to do it well. And I think that to be able to see these changes and show up and have so much say and really develop the research questions, I just think that we're so privileged to be in this position and to be able to lead these questions.
Nicely timed. Well
that
done.
perfect?
You've done this before, haven't you? Kelsey, thank you so much for being here. I think
Thank
what
you.
was so exciting for me is that you can really feel the passion that you have for what you do. And I think it's so important to have role models like you for budding investigators, because there is such a kind of a negative opinion about academic positions now. And I feel like a lot of our graduate students are steering away from academic careers. And I think you bring such energy and passion. And I'm really happy that you were coming and speaking today and putting this career choice in such a positive light. So thank you for sharing your experiences.
Thank you
with
so
us.
much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.